all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fossone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, but listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We've got a couple of great programs for you today. We're going to hear from veterans themselves, not historians, not authors, not researchers, but guys with boots on the ground. First, we're going to talk to Joshua Shores, who chronicles his real battle in being a warrior and all the things he struggled with. It's really a raw conversation. And we're also going to talk to Anthony Dyer, who was an Air Force gunner, and again, kind of a raw discussion about what it's like to be in combat. I think you're going to find both of these guys have something to say that'll help you understand if you haven't been there, and something that you can relate to if you have.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Joshua Shores, who goes by Joshua, so I'm not dissing him. I already asked him how he wanted to be called. Josh is a Marine. He served for
just under 4.5 years, yeah.
4.5 years in the Marine Corps, came out as a staff sergeant, and there's been a lot of growth in the subsequent years, and he captured both his 4 years in the Marine Corps, where he was both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and his time afterwards, the transition and the issues with that, in a book called Counting on Death, a Marine infantryman's journey from the front lines of combat to the fight for peace. It's really well done, Josh. It really captured me in reading it. Nice job.
Thank you for reading it. I appreciate that.
So,
and thank you for having me on.
You know, you're a 19-year-old kid, and you say to yourself, I just need time in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. I was actually 17 when I signed the papers, and my dad was a Marine. My mom's side of the family had mostly Marines, and then I had my dad's side, grandpa and great grandpa both served in World War I and II. And so serving was just something that felt right, and I'd always had an interest in, but it wasn't anything that was ever required. Like my parents weren't telling me you need to go join the military. They supported if I wanted to do the college route, but I knew that's what I wanted to do.
And you grew up in the Midwest. Give us a little thumbnail of getting through high school and kind of what that upbringing was that you brought to the Marine Corps.
Sure. So, yeah, my dad's an entrepreneur, and so I grew up with that mindset around me, and helping him at his shops and stuff growing up. So, a lot of the time growing up, spending it with my dad was helping him build whatever business he was doing, just to be present and see how that worked. And in high school, I worked like 3 or 4 jobs at the same time, juggling If it was summer, I was working more. Winter, I was working less, and I had a very steady girlfriend that is now my wife. And
Now,
so that we spent a lot of time together.
this is an important part of the story. He's been married now 20 years.
Yes,
They
sir.
they went together for a number of years in front of that, but there was a wrinkle in this as well. And I think this is again a kind of a common theme among military men in particular. Um, Talk about that wrinkle.
Yeah, so we stopped dating. So when I moved, I was a year ahead of her in school, and so when I moved out of town and went to the Marine Corps, that next year was her senior year in school, and we had dated at the beginning part of that, but um, you know, life back home being different from here, she was talking to guys, just hanging out and having fun, and I got jealous, and so I just started talking to women out in California, and so we decided to break up for I think it was like a 3 month period in the
I,
fall,
I
and
think if I was talking to her, she wouldn't say we decided to break up.
oh no, it was me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's right. Um, and yeah, and during that time it was just kind of like, well, I'm free and I'm about to go to war, so I'm just gonna do whatever I want. Um, and then right before I left on my pre-deployment leave, um, I apologized for all my shenanigans and asked her if she wanted to start dating again. And after taking a good slap at one point, uh, she took me back. So
As I say,
she's slapping me, to be clear.
this is a
She's slapping
story a
me.
lot.
Yes.
This is a story a lot of
Yeah.
guys can relate to. So I sorry to put you on the spot, but I
Yeah.
wanted to bring it out because
No,
here you
that's
are, a young Marine, and they say, you know what, you're a rifleman. We're sending you over. So talk about your first deployment. There are two of them we're going to talk about, but this first one I think is where, as a young guy, your values, your morals, your compass is really getting whipped around.
yeah. So going there. So when I first got dropped to 1-5, I got assigned to Alpha Company, which was the in a typical Marine Corps um, training workup. They have different assigned duties for every company, and ours was a boat company, which we didn't do any boat training when we first got there. They had done a little bit prior to us coming back before they went and did Fallujah, but it was all Iraq combat focused. And so when I got dropped there, it was with OIF 1 and OIF 2 vets who were very salty. And so there was a lot of expectations for myself and from them that we needed to be ready to go to combat for a third time, for the unit, and with that being my first time. And so there's just a lot of expectations of us young guys to be able to perform and not let the team down. And so we looked to, we call them the senior lance corporals. We looked to, the seniors that had been there, the non-commissioned officers, everything. And, it was just a whirlwind of training. We got dropped right into like training evolutions for combat. So the mindset was definitely, we're going there to kill the enemy. And I talk about it a little bit in the book, but I think the failure as a military force to try to transition us into a battle space that was more like, hey, we want to win hearts and minds. There was a bit of a failure because our mindset was just go there and kill. And Marines, that's what we should do. That's what the Marine Corps is great at. And I think it was just kind of a weird time to be in there in 2005, right after all the big pushes from Fallujah and the initial Ramadi combat. So
You find yourself in some hot situations that again sort of tested your moral compass. You want to talk about that a little bit?
yeah, so combat is a interesting thing to take part in that you have your rules of engagement, and when you're new to it, you're like, well, that's easy to remember. I'll do those things, But then the situations present themselves, and then the enemy's tactics, because a good enemy would adapt to what our tactics are, and they start figuring out what our rules of engagement are, and so they adapt their combat to um, maybe what we can't how we can't respond, and it makes us feel very vulnerable. So it was a very confusing place to be, especially for I think a lot of the older veterans, because they had done the initial invasion, which was an obvious way to do combat. You're just going across and fighting an enemy, and then Fallujah too, where they had dropped leaflets and made announcements that anyone left in the city is considered an enemy. To now putting us in Ramadi, where we're trying to mix in with the local populace, and so that mindset's a hard one to break, especially after you've experienced heavy combat, um, and you know what happens when you let your guard down. So it was a very crazy place of like IEDs all the time getting blown up, or hearing other units getting blown up, knowing people that are getting killed and wounded, um, and then also having while you're going out on those missions and getting blown up, the goal of that maybe patrol was to shake hands and kiss babies, and how do you do that after you're losing people and fighting cowards in a sense, because a lot of the tactics were quick ambushes, and then they run or they drop the weapon. So
One of the tasks your group had in Ramadi was protecting what was called the government center, where there would be U.S. troops there almost all the time, thus making it easy for the terrorists to go, well, those guys are going to be there. So we now know where to put our IEDs, and indeed you lost some guys as a result of that. And again, that really threw, based on the notes that you took while you were there, that became part of the book, Counting on Death. The loss of those members in an IED situation at a government center where you were constantly trying to protect it really was formative to your experiences.
yeah, and that's why I titled it Counting on Death, because I feel like the psychological effect of the IED on everyone else that survives them, because I was blown up 3 times in Ramadi with IEDs, and then we had like grenades I got blown up with separately in Helmand province. But having that many different experiences with it, um, it's easier. If I found it easier, and I think a lot of guys did, at just saying, well, I'm not going to come home from this, so I'm just going to do what I need to survive, and I don't really care, you know.
Pretty early on, you sort of said, I can feel myself turning into a monster.
Hmm.
That's a pretty shocking statement. Explain what you meant when you wrote those words in the book.
Sure. So the way I looked at the terrorists we were fighting as it was monsters before I went. They killed thousands of people in 9/11, and then the war up to that point, and um, the beheadings of their own people, or people of different religions in the countries that we were in. Um, I had this vision of what we were there to fight, and in reality, like on reflecting and writing the book, when I first started this back in 2009 or 10, whenever it was I started writing this, it was like, well, we were doing some of the similar things, like not beheading people and all that, but it's like there was this weird line that we were trying to stay on, that I watched myself and watched others stray from, just on the psychological effects of war and the rules that were there. And it wasn't until I started doing, until I wrote the book and then some of these podcasts, where there was a realization that came out that um, some of the reasons I felt so much of the guilt that weighed on me was we were trying to do what we thought our government and our people, our citizens in America wanted us to do. And at one point, when I had that shooting that I got an inquiry or investigation on, um, of that man, it was like, why am I getting investigated for doing something that we were approved to do? And now, how does this war like, now what do I do? I thought I was doing what everyone wanted me to do, what everyone trained me to do. And instead of nice job, it was, why'd you do that? And, you might go to prison for it, And so it was as a 19-year-old kid, who's had, pretty intense combat at that time and multiple blast exposure. It was like, I don't know what my brain was doing, but I was just in a survival mode.
Yeah, and I think what captured me about your writing here was it's just so candid and raw about the emotions you were going through and what you were trying to process and in your brain, but also on a day-to-day basis of what you run into and see and the reaction from militants and civilians and how the hell do you tell the difference between them. Um, the book's candid enough to say, hey, at times I felt like I was a bully or a moron for what I was doing. And that's why this is not just a typical read. It's really a good reflection, I think, of the questions everybody has when put into those situations. Talk a little bit about the audience you were writing for.
I was writing for, I think, mainly friends and families of vets. A lot of the vets, the guys I served with, know the story, and everyone, I was talking with Kelly Thompson, the the retired lieutenant colonel that wrote the foreword for the book, and he's like, he was in some of those firefights, and he's like, yeah, did you remember this thing or this? And I was like, no, I don't. I don't remember that happening. And it's just interesting that any one of those men that has served alongside could write a book, and it would be, similar timeline, different events that they picked up on or witnessed. And so I was really writing it from my view, and to go back to you saying it was very raw. I came to the conclusion that I should just write it as real as I can, because a lot of the stuff that was weighing on me are the things that have led me to like suicide attempts and constantly thinking about killing myself. And it's like, well, if I was willing to do that, why can't I just share a story and let's see what other people think? And I think a lot of guys have that weighing on them. And so if I have a book that family or friends can read, um, that gives a little bit of insight into some of the things that vets might be thinking or feeling, even though we are very good at hiding it, then that's a win in my book. And maybe
Yeah,
that gives a little understanding of it,
I think you've accomplished that. I think this is a
Thank you.
book that should be given to friends and family, spouses, and loved ones to get a little peek inside what maybe their Marine or Army vet went through in combat. You have a section on sunflowers. My note says sunflowers and blood, and I'm going to make you talk about it a little bit. But there's
Sure.
a line in it that says, in that particular section on page 62, that says, war turns the beautiful into the ghastly, the kind into the cruel. Damn, man, were you an English major?
Nope, that's a cranny didn't read.
What a great turn of phrase, but really, it's a bit of a trigger. Talk about it for you.
Yeah, so we lost 5 guys in an IED blast from second platoon, and our platoon was tasked with doing the quick response force for that. And so we were out there very shortly after it happened, and where I dismounted from on my vehicle, I had to walk through it was like a small, I don't know, quarter acres or smaller lot of sunflowers that were about knee high, a little maybe mid thigh high, and I walked through it, and I remember just looking down at them as I'm walking, trying to make sure there's not another IED or anything else that might be in there. As I'm looking down, I start noticing there's debris and then blood splatter on the petals of these flowers, and knowing that, the smells and everything else that were there of the 5 guys that had died, it just forever ruined the sunflowers for me. Um, I can't look at a sunflower and see anything beautiful. It's just like I see that.
And
So
again, that's one of those lessons for our family members, because unless you express that, nobody would know why that's a trigger, right? They would think, well, look, a bunch of your wife, or you walk through a beautiful flower shop and a bunch of sunflowers. We have to express that, hey, this triggers this memory for me. so that our friends and families know that and can work with that. I keep going back to family because during the middle of this, you sort of got to a point where you're accepting death and decide to end your relationship with your fiance.
Yep. Yeah, I called off the marriage and in the middle of it being planned because we were planning on getting married right when I returned from Iraq. And um yeah, I was numb to everything. This is after my friends had died and we were, middle, I think it was July 17th or 12th or something like that. And I actually have it, I have a little black book that it would be, I've often thought it would be cool to publish or do it like some kind of a company document to the book because it's notes I took, but I stopped writing it at that point. I said, no, screw it. Why am I trying to even remember this? I will never forget it. Why am I writing notes? And at that point, I said, I'm not even going to make it home. I'll call off the wedding. And so I went into the phone trailer and called my wife um, like an hour before we were leaving for the government center, which is a 4-day post that we'd stand. And I didn't have a chance to call, or she wouldn't have a chance to communicate with me during that time. So I kind of set myself up for failure by doing it right before we left. And then my friends, on post and at the government center convinced me that I was being an idiot and that I was going to make it back. And so the day I got back, I called and said, I'm sorry, and then of course it wasn't just an easy, oh, that's okay. Um, but I think that was her first instance of seeing that there were a lot of changes in me happening, um,
Well,
which were
you
concerned.
actually got to the point, and you write that at one point you felt you didn't deserve to come home.
Yeah. Yeah. Like seeing the quality of men that were surrounding me dying and the way I upheld them in my mind. And, it was like, well, why does this 3-time combat veteran have to go die? It should be me. Like, why this person survived way more combat than me. Um, I shouldn't be here. I'm not as good of a Marine as them.
And again, I think that's the sort of thing a lot of people think about. Why I like the book so much is it expresses this and makes us face it head on. But you do come out of Iraq, you get home, you get married in 2019, I believe it is.
2005. Get
Oh,
married?
2005.
Yep, October of '05.
And now you're getting close to the tour being up to you re-enlist. What do you do? What do you do? Uh, have you proven everything you wanted to prove to yourself? Lot of stuff going on in your head, isn't there?
Yep. Yeah, and I had actually so my second deployment after I got back was to the 31st MEU where we did like a Southeast Asia float basically, and we went to Okinawa, China, and the Philippines. And so there's no combat in that one. And after I came off that, um they said, "Hey, we're starting up this new organization, or this new one had just been started up called MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command, and they were looking for um, combat infantry volunteers at the time from 1-5, as they were already like pulling guys from recon, and they had stood down force recon to make MARSOC. So a lot of those guys just kind of went right to there. And so I talked with a couple of my friends and said, "Hey, do you want to extend our time to go do MARSOC?" And it sounded like a cool thing to attempt to do. And so I talked to my wife and said, "Hey, what are your thoughts if I, instead of getting out, which I was supposed to do, what if I extend my time and go to Marine Special Operations?" And she, we talked about it, and she understood that I felt like I needed to do that, and especially because I assumed that most likely we'd be going to combat, and I had combat experience that I felt would be wasteful just to get out of the Marine Corps with. And now having been I was a corporal at the time, a senior corporal, I just felt it was my duty to pass some of that on to younger guys. So, or people maybe that hadn't been to combat. And so we extended, and I went through the MARSOC, all that training, and ended up having to send my wife home during that because we just never saw each other. I was so busy training. And then that led us to going to Afghanistan. So
And how long was that tour?
that was December through April. And before that, we went to actually the Philippines for a month and lived there, and we were doing foreign internal defense training. So we cross-trained their Philippine drug enforcement agents and some of their special forces, and it was NBI, the National Bureau of Investigation for the Philippines. And so we did a month-long training program for them,
So
where I was the chief instructor there, and that was an awesome experience too. It was 76 students. So
the book talks a lot about coming home too, and again, it's candid. It's what you want to understand what's going on in a guy's head and help get a look at what other vets may be doing. And you write, I lost track of my soul, and when I accepted my death, I became the enemy. I turned into a terrorist in a foreign land and displayed little mercy toward my opponents. All that swirling around in your head as you get out, and you describe, you write, one word sums up my experience of leaving the active duty military and returning home: loneliness.
mm,
That's a lot to carry, and it's a lot to carry by yourself. How did you go through that phase?
I drank a lot and isolated myself.
So
So
I
I
told
made
you this book is candid, and Josh Shore's is nothing but candid. Again, a lot of guys do that. How do you keep going through that and not ending up, on the slab?
yeah, I think honestly there was something that happened along the way there. My brother-in-law died in a car accident, and right after I got out, like 3 months after I got out of the Marine Corps. And so my wife and I had a lot of optimism in what life was going to be while I'm still going through stuff. And so when my brother-in-law died, it was like, well, now that my wife, has been patient with me and supportive, is falling apart. It's like, it's like, you have to make a decision. And my decision is I want this family to work. And so, I just kind of put walls up, and then it was like, how can I be supportive of my wife? That's the most important thing at this point. And so it kind of had to put a lot of stuff aside. And at that point I said, well, I can't, I'm having trouble doing this. Um, I need help. And so I went to the VA and just said, I need help. And they started me in a program there. Um, and at the end of the day, the program, it was supposed to be just me in a meeting. And I said, because of the situation with my wife and I, and her brother passing away, I said, I can't do this alone. I can't do all this talking at these sessions and then come home and feel the way I do without my wife understanding what's going on. She doesn't have the patience for it. It's not fair to her. And so I asked if she could come in on the sessions, and they said, well, we can't do couples therapy. And I said, so you'd rather just me kill myself or do something else than have my wife sit in with me? Is that where we're at with this? It's ridiculous. And they said, well, we'll just have her sit in. And it ended up being something that was kind of a couples therapy, and it saved myself and my marriage. And it was a lot better for my wife to be sitting in and hearing me talk about the things that were weighing on me, versus me going to the session and then driving the 45 minutes back home and not wanting to talk about anything. So
You call out in the book, through our almost year-long weekly sessions, Dr. Laura gave both of us the tools to make it through relationship and personal issues. And I want to highlight, because a lot of guys think, well, I'm not going to the VA, they don't care, blah, blah, blah. But you call out that the mental health therapy, the sessions you got from the VA made the difference. It's work. You write somewhere, it's hard work. But don't cut off that avenue just because you think those people don't care. They care, don't they?
yeah, and they do. And that's the thing is, from what my experience has been with the VA system, at least, is they're not going to reach out to every vet and say, how are you doing? They're just not. It's impossible. And it's a governmental run program that supports veterans, but you as a veteran have to look at yourself and say, I need this help, or it's time now, or take the cues from your family. And that was another thing, that like there were cues from my family members of like, do you need help? Maybe you should stop drinking as much. And so like you have to be aware enough, and and willing enough to help yourself by reaching out and being persistent. You have to be your own advocate. If they're not doing a good enough job, you need to be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And yeah, I had to go do some of those things, and it was tough at first, but once I got the care, it wasn't shitty care. And I think that's what I hear from a lot of vets is like they don't care. In my experience, after I started the program, and now even still, like I still see a therapist at least quarterly, if not more, when I'm struggling, and that's done through the community care from the VA. And I had to be an advocate to get there, and I had to say to myself that I need it. You have to be able to say that, and that's a big step, and it takes a lot because you don't want, it's not weak, but you don't want to come off as weak.
Pretty good advice from Josh Shores. You really have to be your own advocate, and we preach that really on Veterans Radio. So here's another great example of a warrior who's strong enough to say, I need help, and reaches out and gets it. Let's have a few more words from our sponsors, and then we're going to hear from Anthony Dwyer about his time as an Air Force gunner, helping out the guys on the ground, the Army folks who loved them when they were around.
Military veterans touch everyone's life. I'm guessing right now you're thinking of a veteran, a close friend, relative. Maybe it's you. Even the toughest of us sometimes need help, but don't know where to turn for support. You don't need special training to help a veteran in your life. Even small actions can make a world of difference. If you know a veteran in crisis, please call the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. A message from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today, Anthony Dwyer. You might hear a little of his North Carolina twang in there. Anthony, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you spent 21 years in the Air Force. You got some wisdom to pass along, but let's start with, how did a nice kid like you from North Carolina end up in the Air Force?
Yeah. So my senior year in high school, I don't know, roughly 6 months left of high school left there. My dad, gave me the typical dad talk of, you're about to be a grown man. Like, it's time to either get a job, go to college, or get out. And I had talked to a Navy recruiter, and he was talking about being on a boat for 6 months, and then an Army recruiter. Then I was like, I'm going to talk to my dad about sort of the quality of life of the Air Force. He was in for like 4 years down in Tampa, MacDill. And this is way before I was born. And, it's talked about the good chow halls, the TDY, and the golf clubs, and
Exactly.
yeah, stuff like that, right? And so I was like, I'm going to do the Air Force. And I was on the delayed enlistment program for, about that 6 months. And July 18th of 2000, there I was on my flight to San Antonio, Texas, to basic training.
Well, all those jokes about the Air Force life, a lot of them are true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, as I said, you were in for 21 years, got out as a tech sergeant E6, now living in New Mexico. But give us a thumbnail of what your service was about, because I'm not sure we've ever had a special operations aviation guy on Veterans Radio, and a lot of the Army pukes don't have any idea what you guys did.
Yeah. So I was a special missions aviator, and I flew in started out flying on the there in 2010. It was about midway through my career I started flying. But the 16th Special Operations Squadron on the AC-130 gunship, the H model Spectre gunship. And that the mission of the gunship as a whole is to provide that close air support for your unconventional forces. I like to call them super ninjas. Give them that close air support, and then also flew on the HA-60G Pave Hawk there for about 4 or 5 years out at Moody Air Force Base as a the 41st Rescue Squadron as a SMA. And what a special missions aviator is back in 2012, 2013, the Air Force combined the aerial gunner, the loadmaster, and the flight engineer career field, made a really like a Swiss Army knife in the sky, if you think about it that way, sort of a jack of all trades and all that. But yeah, it was a pleasure and honor to fly and fight beside the best men and women in the Air Force.
Well, we joke about it a little bit, the Army guys in particular, about the Air Force, but they're sure glad to have you for that close air support, weren't they?
Yeah. A lot of times I worked with the being overhead, the Rangers and the Green Berets, stuff like that, and there were some nights, not when we didn't even shoot, we're just our noise signature would keep the enemy at bay, if you will, and those guys could get some, a few hours of shut eye and stuff like that.
And tell us where your tours took you in terms of overseas missions.
Yeah, I went to Bagram multiple times. I think in the book I call it the Bagram routine there. And as a flyer, it's all about your flight hours. So you can basically get 330 flight hours in 90 days. And if you hit that or see that, they have to set you down, for a little bit. And so we managed that. And then basically 3 months there, then 3 months back was the ops tempo there for Bagram. And then 2015, the ISIS, threat happened. And but basically, we went to, at that point, Kuwait, and then flew over, Iraq and Syria. And basically, it was Type 3, like controlled air support, where you have like a JTAC at that time anyway, with like a general and a TOC or whatnot, and basically clearing you to engage on the ISIS enemy and stuff like that. And then in rescue, I went to East Africa. Would say that twice there.
These are not, I guess, what I would call normal missions, were they?
No, definitely not. I tell people there's really two types of AC-130 gunship missions where so back to even in 2011, believe it or not, we had pagers, man, and like they would, page us as in like an alert type thing, and it would either one let you know you had troops in contact, so you had to launch within like I think it was like 15 to 30 minutes to be off the ground, and then you had the other ones which would basically like there's like direct action stuff going on the ground, like you could have SEALs kicking doors down, Green Berets doing FID type stuff, and yeah, so there's basically that two types of missions, and one thing I always loved about whether I should or not shouldn't, these are all jobs you really don't have to do, but at the end of the day, like there'd be ticks, where those guys been shot at all day, and we would get like miles away and start picking the enemy up with our sensors, and they just run like bees, hearing the four fans of freedom there, and they knew at that point, it's over for them. So it was to be that relevant, or that sense of relevance, I guess, as far as a gunship guys, that was my whole why all those years, and making sure those guys got home to their family. That was everything to me.
Yeah, that close air support, and in both of those instances, whether it's Afghanistan, Africa, Iraq, the Air Force has air superiority. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. As far as like the air-to-air stuff, no one's really gonna test us, at least not in that environment. Even in near peer, I'd argue that they wouldn't even stand a smidge of a chance with us. You know what I mean? And as far as the close air support, there's a few kings there. There's the AC-130 gunship, and then the A-10, and then sometimes even the Apache.
Well, all that combat experience, so while you're up in the air, you're not down on the ground. It still has an impact on the airman who's supplying that support and knowing what's going on in the ground. How did you internalize that situation?
Yeah. So I always say it's not what you do in flying in life that haunts you, it's what you don't do. And I was on a CASEVAC mission when I was on rescue helicopters in East Africa. There, I think it was 8 June of 2018, and we got to see the best side of combat search and rescue that day, where we got to save 5 lives, and then one Eagle, one American when we got back on the operating table. He passed away, so that one sticks with you, and I'd be lying if I didn't say if I wasn't still dealing with that. But I was able to get through USOCOM like a prolonged exposure therapy with a psychiatrist, and part of that, what that means really is you're getting comfortable being uncomfortable, telling your story, sort of like we're doing right here, and you write that story out over and over and over, and which really led to the book, because she's like, you should tell your story. Someone's told me that 100 times, and I never did. But once I got out and that the dust settles, I was like, maybe someone could get help if they read this, and that, to me, that's what it was all about, just paying it forward, and also to show the rest of America this is what goes on when you're sleeping.
Well, and I think that's part of it is there's all kinds of ways to kind of get yourself through this, and not everything works for everybody. Talk a little bit about, sort of, and I'm only asking you to do this not because I'm, want to deal in tragedy here, but I want to deal in reality. And there'll be a lot of family members and veterans listening in on Veterans Radio who don't maybe understand the lows and where you were at, and then how it takes a few attempts to get out, right? I mean, you don't transition through this in a weekend. So tell us about the journey.
Yeah, so I went back to gunships for my or 18-130s for my last 2 years here at Cannon Air Force Base, and I wanted to deploy on my last or my 20-year mark was with July 18th of 2020. That was my 20-year mark, and went to Iraq there, and I remember it was so slow, and we didn't really shoot it off for those 90 days at that point, and I just remember thinking like I could see the end of it, being near of my career. I'm at 20 years, that sense of purpose, that sense of my identity felt like it was gone, and I got back and I hit the retirement button, and in that whole year time frame, I really developed a really bad drinking problem, to be honest with you. What started as a weekend drinking habit turned into like at least a pint a night, and so my wife basically gave me the ultimatum of like, hey, like it's either the bottle or me and your daughter, and I'm thank God and very thankful that God led me to choose my family at that point, and so she was like, you need to get help, and some other people sort of noticed it as well, and I went and got help, and that's when I saw the psychiatrist and started that journey. And then what would happen, every time I wanted to drink, I'd pick up a pen and I'd write something down, and wake up in the morning and try to make the sense of this sort of Charlotte's web, web of emotional words, and just make sense of 2 decades of war, all those feelings. So it's therapeutic in the way if you just bleed it on the page, get it out, because a lot of people have the similar struggle, that sense of identity, a sense of relevance, when that's gone.
And a lot of guys face that same problem, and the family says it's us or them. Again, not maybe a switch you can flip like a light, and right. You decide right away you're going to transition. You're going to stop doing whatever the addictive or detrimental activity is. When she gave you the ultimatum, did it take you a while to say, I'm there, or was it a lightning bolt and you were able to flip that switch?
Yeah, there was a couple of times where I fell off the wagon, if you will, but just a handful of times, and then I'd realized that there was a spiritual side to this as well, and I'd prayed and prayed and prayed, and I had a very most important conversation I ever had is the one I had with Jesus and myself that night, is the way I look at it, and that's when I truly got the the courage and just the willpower just to put that bottle down and to face my demons head on.
It's and there's a lot of folks who talk about the moral injury that veterans in combat experience as they think about who am I taking out? Why did the guy next to me have this accident, or this get in the way of the bullet, and I was just nearby, or the grenade, or whatever it might be. So there is this moral component to the injury, and that's sort of the spiritual aspect that you're talking about.
100%. Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because in the book I talk about still my unanswered question to this day is like, why does God let bad things happen to good people? And I'm still searching for that answer. I have some ideas what it may be, but yeah, I asked that question in the book, and that was a lot of dealing with that as well. Is just talking to God constantly, trying to figure that part of life out.
So we're talking to Anthony Dyer. He's a Air Force veteran, did his 20 years, was with Special Operations, Aviation, close air support. But one of the things he probably never thought he'd put on his resume when he was growing up in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina is author. Yeah. So you have out now a memoir called Moonchild, A Warrior's Reckoning with War, Addiction, and Purpose. You've kind of mentioned, hey, I started writing stuff to sort of bleed on the page as therapy. Talk a little bit, writing a book's not easy. Putting yourself out there is not easy. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the journey.
Yeah, and my friends always joke with me that, North Carolina education, Appalachia, I still probably reading right on a 5th grade level somehow. I have a book, but yeah, so I'm surprised as you are about that. But so basically, when I started writing all these things together and let me back up a little bit. So there's a point in the Air Force where you're applying for your DD-214, right? And you walk out this personnelist type flight, this office, and often in that office, when you leave, you look back at there's no door handle on the other side of that door. So it was sort of symbolic, like man, I can leave, but I can never really get back into this machine that keeps going, and So that was sort of, I was dealing with that as well, and like I said, every time that these thoughts would come in my mind, these bad thoughts, these sad thoughts, whatever the case was, I would write them down, whether it's like Eminem with a napkin next to my, my nightstand, something like that, or whatever I had. And then finally I got the courage to reach out to an editor, she's actually a war journalist, Holly McKay, and through LinkedIn. And then as soon as I did that, she responded like right away. I remember I was in Walmart and she responded, and I'm texting, and we set up a phone call, and she's like, yeah, she's like, I'll do the editing for you. And really, she did a really good job of pulling those words out of me and giving my words, just painting that picture with my words and giving my words teeth is what I like to say. And she in turn recommended a publisher, Robbie Grayson, that did like the hardware of the book, if you will. And between that time frame, next thing you know, I have a book.
Well, they say everybody's got a story, and I think that's probably true. Some are forged into fire, which yours certainly is. And I think that the title of this is really interesting because it's reckoning with war, which we've, kind of maybe can all understand. Addiction, maybe we can all understand how that comes about. And purpose. That's an interesting ad. Talk about why finding a new purpose after leaving the military, which was so clearly the purpose for 20 years. Tell us about that battle.
Yeah, so and the purpose and the title even itself, like Moonchild, a lot of people ask me about that, and to me the moon's really symbolic. For example, flying an AC-130, it was often my lighthouse, and it would highlight the terrain with NVGs and stuff like that. And and there's these moments when everything is going against you, right? And it could be the weather, the system, the emergency procedures, all the communications, everything. And I realized that that's the day where, like, you don't get to fall, you get to rise, and that, to me, that moon burns the brightest on the darkest nights. And that's, when you get to really find a lot out about yourself, so the moon's always meant that symbolically a lot to me.
And expand on this though in terms of that purpose you had to go find.
Yeah, so like I said, when you leave, that sense of purpose, all that hits you like a tidal wave. Your sense of identity, your relevance is gone. Like I'm not going to be able to fly anymore, and make sure these guys get home to their family on the gunship and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, well, right now I'm finding the legacy to be to find those those moments in the calm with the family and the norm things of life. That's, to me, that's legacy now. That's my new purpose, being the best dad I could be, husband I could be, best author I could be, best friend I could be to someone.
It's easy to say that out loud, and it makes sense when you say it out loud, but it's harder to live it, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. And it's, at the end of the day, I can either pick up my phone when someone calls or I can't, and when these, it's happened before, I've actually recently talked to the guy off a ledge. Unfortunately, I had to do that, but he's a better place for it now. So it's definitely hits you, and those moments happen. Paying it forward, and God will definitely give you that chance.
Well, and part of this is that veterans ethos, where hey, I had your back over there, I'm going to have your back over here, but it does take reaching out. It does take answering the phone, doesn't it?
100%. Yeah, and I always tell people, like, as far as veterans go, like we know each other really well, right? Especially the ones we served with, and there's a difference between, hey, how's it going, man, or like, hey, how are you doing, really, man? Because we know each other's emotions, we know the looks on our faces, what you know each other that much.
And usually when you're writing a book of some sort, you've got an audience in mind. When you were writing Moonchild, A Warrior's Reckoning with the War, Addiction, and Purpose, and maybe your editor say, hey, you got to get a little more focused on the audience. What audience were you writing to?
Really, it was anybody that's served, or anybody that's had some sort of addiction problem. Those two main pools of people, and a lot of these uncommon jobs, it could be a policeman or firefighter, these very uncommon jobs where sometimes, unfortunately, you don't want to have to do these jobs, but you see the worst thing that could happen to someone.
These kind of memoirs, Anthony, I also think help family members and friends who maybe can't be in the shoes of the veteran, didn't see what the veteran has, and doesn't understand what that person, guy or gal, may be going through. It sort of helps to read your memoir and be able to recognize some of that in somebody else you might know. And maybe you've heard that from people.
Yeah, you definitely see some common struggles between like like paramedics and definitely cops and firefighters, jobs like that, and where they've had to face that trauma head on, and I will say that USOCOM was really good as far as like one of the soft truths is what we call it is humans are more important than hardware, and I mean those guys they live by that, and basically they invented the preservation of the force and family, where you get a physical therapist, you get a trainer, and then you get a psychologist, in your squadron oftenly.
Yeah, that again, I think the U.S. military has gotten much better over time with this, and particularly after the 20 years of Afghanistan, recognizing, hey, it's we got to help on the mental health side of things, and you probably saw that change over time.
Oh yeah, and I remember, believe it or not, Admiral McCraven came to the talk one night, and basically it's when the H model gunship was going away, and he said, hey, he's like, listen guys, like we're slowing down the ops tempo. It's not going to be what we call 1-to-1 dwell time. It was, instead of like 90 days there, 90 days back, it would be like 90 days there, then like 6 months off, so slowed it down, and that's when you started seeing a lot of these programs get implemented and stuff like that.
So what's next for the kid from North Carolina, now living in New Mexico? You're going to write another book? What's the next step, big guy?
Yeah. I'm actually in the process of writing one. It's basically tying the lessons learned from fishing. Believe it or not, fireflies. Like back home, we have a lot of like lightning bugs, and then fishing and flying. So all those three lessons, those three areas of lessons, and then tie them into one and try to be as poetic as I can with it, I guess. So, and also secondly, I'm inventing an app where basically you speak into this app, and with AI like type companion stuff, like it's going to soft edit what the veteran or first responder reads into it, and then they would have the option to either get it edited and published for either, if not free, then very cheap cost. So put it to the state, and we'll see if this nonprofit gets stood up. So
well, that's great. Again, it's purpose along with the family, beyond the family, gives you additional purpose. We've been talking to Anthony Dwyer, who wrote Moonchild, The Roots and Wings of a United States Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator. You can get that book just about anywhere. It make a great read for folks and gift for folks. Anthony, on the way out here, any final word for your fellow veterans?
Yeah, I'd say just keep going. Remember, Henry Ford said that an aircraft, takes off against the wind, not with it. So you're going to lift off, So
excellent. I want to thank you for taking time to talk with Veterans Radio today, Anthony.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. An honor, Jim.
These are really interesting stories in my mind, and that's why I was happy to bring them to you. We've got a couple of guys who, they're the real deal. They spent the time in the sandbox. They did their time in service. But they're also willing to recognize after they got out, there were things they still had to do. They had to work on themselves, if you will. They had to go back into training to kind of shed some of the problems that they had, remold their personality, remold what their purpose was, and as I say, shed some of the bad habits, bad thoughts, things that were built up over 20 years. Whether it's an addiction to the bottle or to high adrenaline activities, parachuting, motorcycle racing, whatever it might be, some of that's kind of false purpose. You're trying to replace the adrenaline rush you got in service with some other adrenaline rush. Well, you can't do that forever. And in both instances, they finally woke up or accepted what people were telling them, maybe their spouse, maybe their parents, maybe their friends. Hey, you gotta get some help. And both Joshua and Anthony were ultimately strong enough to say, I'm going to go get that help. And it isn't a light switch. It doesn't just happen. Anthony kind of mentioned it, but didn't dwell on it. Yeah, I fell off the wagon a few times. You might fall off 2 times. You might fall off 20 times. The key is to get back on and recognize that you have to give up some of those activities. I find it interesting that in Anthony's case, he said every time I wanted to pick up a bottle, I'd pick up a pen and write out my thoughts. And that's started becoming the basis of a warrior's reckoning with war, addiction, and purpose. Book is titled Moonchild. So, if you've got a friend out there, you've got a battle buddy, you got a family member who's battling, don't count them out. Don't, if they fall off the wagon, help them get back. Help them get back to maybe the therapy they need or seeing a different psychologist, whatever it might be. But I think it's important that we don't give up on these guys. And I know veterans will not give up on each other. Speaking of groups that won't give up on you, I want to point out the support we get from the Vietnam Veterans of America and also local VSOs such as the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettle Chapter 310 in Ann Arbor, the VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, and the American Legion Press Corps Post 46 in Ann Arbor. They keep us on the air, they keep us grounded, they give us great ideas. So this brings us to the end of our time, and until you get back with Dale Throneberry or myself on Veterans Radio or our podcasts, which you can always find on veteransradio.net, we appreciate you. We appreciate what you've done for the country and for keeping us honest, us supported, and if you want to support us financially, you can go to veteransradio.org, hit the donate button. Both individual donations as well as corporate sponsorships are greatly appreciated. When you've been on the air for 22 years, you're always scraping by and making sure you can get to the next spot. So until next time on Veterans Radio, you are dismissed.